Um, I figured we would start with your background and then get into like how the internet has changed wrestling.
Okay, that's fine, yeah. I just don't have a lot to say about today's stuff because I don't watch very much of it.
Okay, no problem. So I'll, do a short intro and then and then we'll jump into the first part.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm all set.
Welcome to another video from Wrestling Express. For this edition of for this video, I'm here with Greg Oliver. Greg, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, I guess the best way to start off is, as far as your background, like in pro wrestling, because I know you're a writer. You write about wrestling like myself. Why not give a little background on yourself?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, and it was right about the time of Hulkamania. I got interested in pro wrestling, and it happened to coincide when my dad had bought us an Apple IIe computer, and one of the first programs we got did sort of very basic newsletter, desktop publishing. And so my brother and I were playing around, and another friend named Serge Solsky, and we started doing a little newsletter on wrestling called The Wrestling Report. We had no idea there were other people out there doing it. That's the way the world was back in 1985. You didn't really have a clue.
Yeah.
So I did that for 5 years. I also got a job part-time at the Kitchener Record newspaper. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I ended up at Ryerson Polytechnic University, where I studied journalism. Got a job at the Toronto Sun, where I didn't write about wrestling. I didn't write about wrestling at Ryerson either. I took a good hiatus. And then the short version is the internet came along, and the Toronto Sun and the entire Sun media chain wanted to start a website. It ended up being Canoe.ca. I was one of the day one guys. I loved pro wrestling, and I still had all kinds of contacts. And that was about the time that the WCW was taking off with their Nitro. So we ended up writing about wrestling again. I fell right back into it. So I've been at it more than 30 years at this point. I've written about all kinds of other things too. I've had there's 3 hockey books that have been published through ECW Press. One we self-published. There's 2 more hockey books at the publishers. And another one I've been writing, and we'll talk to the guy I'm writing it with later today.
That's very cool. Very cool. I guess you could say I'm talking to a veteran then.
I've been doing this a long time. There aren't very many guys I never got to meet, or at least interview, and it makes for some pretty cool experiences, whether it was writing the first book, Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Canadians, and you get a nice little typewritten note from Gene Kiniski, or there was a message, I wish I could have saved it. It was on our old answering machine. It was from Killer Kowalski, and all he did was he just left the message, said, "Greg, thanks for putting me over." He was our number 3 Canadian all time in history.
Wow, that's that's pretty crazy. That Killer Kowalski. Yeah.
You name them, I've met them or interviewed them. I mean, Dusty Rhodes, told me that, copies of my book were in the NXT library because they wanted the kids to be able to learn. I've been to Bret Hart's house. I've, had countless dinners with all kinds of different people, especially at the College Rally Club, or, sitting down for breakfast with Nikita Koloff in Iowa when you're at the Hall of Fame there. There's wonderful opportunities out there. Part of it is, talent, I guess, to a degree. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be able to get people to trust you, but being in the right place at the right time, and then having some confidence too. I mean, that's a big part of life. There's Nikita Koloff and his dad having breakfast, and my dad and I came in. They had 2 seats. We just said, "Can we sit down and join you?" Same thing, Paul Orndorff at the Hall of Fame when he used to be in Amsterdam. So I've been pretty fortunate, but I also did my training. I went to journalism school, learned how to talk to people, learned how to interview people, learned the really bad stuff you have to do, whether it's going to inquests or writing news stories about sad events. You got that compared to wrestling, and wrestling's a bit of a walk in the park in some ways.
True. What was it like being in a Bret Hart's house?
Well, let's see. That was 1997, so it was just after the screw job in Montreal, and it was a very surreal kind of weekend. I flew out to Calgary from Toronto, where I was based, and the first thing I really wanted to do in Calgary was go meet Ed Whalen, who was the voice of Stampede Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
He had publicized my newsletter on a national basis on his Pro Wrestling Plus TV show on TSN, which is our ESPN in Canada. And so I got to say thank you to him, have a coffee with him. Then I went to, let me try to remember, I went to Brett's house next. That was about 11 o'clock. We sat down in his room and we did a question and answer session. I didn't really get to tour the house or anything. I sat in his office. I met Julie Hart, a couple of the kids running around, but it was kind of business-like. Then after that, I went out to the Hart House, and I got to go see the dungeon. There was a guy there named Carl Leduc, who was the son of Paul Leduc, one of the famed Leduc brothers, and he went down and got stretched instead of I did in the dungeon. And then I just sat with Stu and just talked upstairs for a long time. And I remember being late, so I was staying with a friend of mine in Calgary, and she wanted to go with the band to show me around, which is a great resort, about an hour out of Calgary. And I just ended up being so late at the Hart House because, Stu loved to talk. So that was a really great, really just a day. I mean, I was barely there, but it was a truly wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm. So was Stu as intimidating as I've heard people say?
He was and he wasn't. I mean, he still had an incredible strong grip. But at that point, I don't even know exactly how old he was, but I think if he wasn't 80, he was approaching 80. So you knew you could run away from it at least. But yeah, it was a nice guy. I mean, he was a super guy. And what I really remember though was how busy the Hart House was, right? There was always people coming and going. I got to meet Helen briefly, but it was just, there was always something going on there. And you could just imagine what it must have been like with 12 kids and all the wrestlers in town. It just would have been chaos.
Yeah. So now we can jump forward, since you mentioned the advent of the internet. How much of an effect has the internet had on wrestling?
That's a good question. It goes back to the early days of television, really. So wrestling was one of the first things they broadcast on television. It was simple. You set up one camera, sort of like a webcam. You set up one camera, you have a commentator, and you can broadcast pro wrestling. So that's, I mean, back in 46, 47, 48, 49, those early days of television when it started getting national, there was all kinds of wrestling on TV. And it made superstars of guys like certainly Gorgeous George and Vern Gagne and Killer Kowalski and Hans Schmidt, the guys that were on the Marigold shows out of Chicago. And then you fast forward again and TV changes, and you get regional promotions because every city has a TV station. And again, it's cheap programming. You can show it locally. And then you fast forward yet again, cable TV comes along, and you get the internet, you get TV changing again, and wrestling becomes a national entity through, first we have WTBS, and then you have the USA Network, and WWE doing a national expansion. That was mainly syndication, but cable TV made a lot of that possible. And then the next big change was around 96 again, when cable TV really penetrated most of the market, and you had TNT, the second Turner Network. And so wrestling had all these booms, and so many of them are tied to that. And then comes the internet, and it was a different kind of boom. What it really did was bring all the wrestling fans together in a way they weren't up to that point. I mean, there was Dave Meltzer doing his newsletter. I did a newsletter. Wade Keller did a newsletter. There were all kinds of things out there. Then there was wrestling magazines, but nothing tied us together the way the internet has. And I think that's probably the primary thing that's really happened in pro wrestling because of the internet. And it's been both good and bad, right? I think we have overreactionary promotions that take too much from the internet wrestling community, as we call ourselves. Just because you're passionate about it, you write about it on the internet, does that mean your opinion is right for the greater public? No, not really. So there's been a little bit of that. I think Vince Russo is a great example of a guy who may be listening to the internet too much, and maybe Vince McMahon in the early days didn't listen to it enough. It's changed wrestling, but I'm not sure it's changed it as much as the growth in television did over the years.
That's a different perspective. I've never heard it talked about like that.
Well, I think as internet guys who maybe write on the internet, we have a bit of belief that we're more important than we actually are.
True.
The internet is so big, yet your market is so, your readership might be so tiny, right? But we can laugh all we want about dwindling ratings, but you're still getting millions of people watching pro wrestling on USA Network. You don't get that on the internet anywhere. I mean, you talk about somebody might have 10 million Twitter followers. Well, so what? That doesn't mean they're all clicking on what you post. The internet is such a skewed kind of way of looking at the world, but yet it's an important part of our culture. The social media certainly changed things. It's allowed us to connect with people we never thought we'd connect with. It allowed us to do, video interviews that, you used to have to do in person with the great big setups of, mobile trucks and lighting and all that kind of stuff.
Very true. Very true. But do you think because of the internet that most wrestling fans forgot what it's like to just be a fan?
I'm not sure I'd use the word most. There are definitely fans that have forgotten what it's like to be a genuine fan. That wrestling shouldn't just be about those mark-out moments, those moments unexpected. I mean, they work so hard to give us those now because the internet has made it. They've ruined it in some ways, right? They're revealing secrets before they happen. Oh, Bobby Roode's in the UK. Oh, look, now he's on NXT. Well, you sort of knew that was coming. So that takes a little bit of the fun away from it. I think, as internet fans, we have a way of caring too much about that stuff and not being able to let it go and just, enjoy wrestling for what it is. It's entertainment.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that the internet has eliminated the surprise factor from wrestling, or just made it a lot more difficult?
I think it's just made it much more difficult. I mean, there'll always be surprises, right? Shane McMahon showing up was a bit of a surprise. There will be surprises all along, and it could be as simple as a heel turn. It could be, somebody unexpectedly getting a push, like Zack Ryder winning the Intercontinental title. That was a cool moment. Now, the fact he lost it the next day had internet fans all upset, and I guess that's part of the goal sometimes is you get reaction, and reaction is really, in the end, what you want. You get people talking about your product. It's not any different than Game of Thrones. I mean, they kill off a character, well, it's going to get people talking about it, and then they want to find out what happens next.
Very true. Very true.
I'm good. Just falling apart.
But, I've heard that, I've heard some more old school fans say that the internet has ruined wrestling and that they would want it to go back to how things used to be. Do you think that the business can go back to how things used to be?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the genie's out of the bag. I mean, you're never going to get kayfabe back. You're never going to get those the fans that go and just believe. I mean, obviously there's people still out there that believe on a different level than your average fan. The perfect example just is how WWE's changed. It's now it's Barnum and Bailey touring town to town once, maybe twice a year in the bigger cities, and they're advertising themselves as WWE. They're not advertising who's on top. That used to be the big deal about why you went to the matches, right? You lived in Detroit, you wanted to go see the Sheik get beat up. You lived in Toronto, you wanted to see Whipper Watson. That's the way wrestling used to be, was about, who drew on top. Now it's all about, it's WWE coming to town, and you might get this guy, you might get that guy. That's immaterial. It's about the production itself of WWE.
Now, is that why you think that, you had back in the 80s people like Austin Idol and Ric Flair and Jerry Lawler who could talk people into the arena, and now you have people like a Neville who could work the people into the arena?
Yeah, there's an element of that for sure. I mean, yeah, Dusty Rhodes, Superstar Graham, the Blackjack Mulligan, God rest his soul. Those guys, yeah, they could talk, and they could have been politicians. I mean, they were so great at getting the people to believe and to buy into their program.
Mm-hmm.
There are few guys like that now. Instead, it's become more of a talking head kind of thing in a way. I mean, they're in there cutting their promos, but the promos seem so choreographed. They're written for them. There's no real sense of the absurd you get from a Roddy Piper, like doing some weird rant that would eventually tie into where he needed to go. And that's the way Roddy's brain worked. Back when he died, I remember talking to a childhood friend who played in the NHL, Cam Connor, and asking him about Roddy and his brain. And he said, after first little bit in wrestling, yeah, he had so many concussions that, his brain didn't go A to B to C. It went A to X to Y to, back to B to N. He just jumped all around, but eventually he hit his point. So yeah, some of that magic's gone from pro wrestling. Does Neville sell a ticket? I don't know. He's part of the spectacle for sure. But do I go, well, I really want to see Neville live? I think that works on the indies still. Like if he was working a local show down in Toronto, or Blue Demon Jr. is coming to Toronto, and he's working a summer show. And you know what? There's a lot of people who would love to see Blue Demon Jr. in person, just to say they've seen him. So that element still does exist. It just doesn't exist sort of on a national basis anymore, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. But as far as Blue Demon, would that have more to do with the fact that he's like sort of not on the same level as a local star, but more as I don't know if I should go as far to call him a legend, but
well, he's a legend to certain people, right? I mean, you're obviously trying to attract a Hispanic crowd,
mm-hmm.
But not just that. I mean, you get your hipsters, certainly your knowledgeable wrestling fans that, wow, Blue Demon Jr., I mean, he's a big deal. He's former NWA World Champion. There's lots of elements to that guy coming to town, and he's just one example. It's the same reason a guy like Cody Rhodes or Damian Sandow, they have tons of indie bookings around there because you get to finally interact with these guys. The WWE entity, when it tours, you get so little interaction with the guys. Pro wrestling used to be about, you'd stand outside the arena and try and get an autograph with the 3,000-4,000 other fans that were going to your local arena. In Toronto, they had the Wood Street entrance, which is at the back, and you could stand around there, and the guys would come in, some would drive, some would walk from the local hotel, whatever it was, and those personal interactions kept you coming back. WWE's eliminated that unless you're paying big bucks for it, with the VIP thing. So you need to find that in other ways. And the indies have continued to succeed on that basis because, yeah, once a guy's cut loose, all of a sudden I can go up to Cody Rhodes at a local show and say, man, I really enjoyed watching you in WWE. It's so great to meet you in person. And he can feel the same way about it. It's that chance that he doesn't get enough with WWE because everything had to be so controlled because they're such a big entity. There's 15,000 people at a show. You can't interact with everybody.
That's very true. Do you think that's maybe a reason why people should pay more attention to the indies and not invest like all their attention in WWE?
your time and what you're interested in, right? Uh, Personally, I'd rather go to an indie show and see the show live and maybe, have a note about somebody who could be good. Somewhere I have a notepad that says Sexton Hardcastle, which is, of course, Edge's first name in Toronto when he was starting out. It said Sexton Hardcastle could be good if ceiling was higher, because he was working like a bar show. So I love the indies for that perspective. And yeah, there's people who are just interested in WWE. There's people just interested in indies. There's people just interested in Lucha Libre. It's not any different than, I'm just a Formula One fan. I don't care about IndyCar. But then there's other people who are just race fans, and they like watching all the different versions. So there's something there for everybody. And certainly the WWE's almost priced itself out of the market for a lot of families to go to shows. When you're paying $40-50 a ticket for your kids, and then they want all the merchandise, and then there's the cost of the hot dogs and everything there. I mean, that's a big expense, and that's their one big expense of the year, maybe, their entertainment. So the indies offer a great option to that, for sure.
Okay. I completely agree. I totally agree with that. Now, if you don't mind, with the time we have left, I would like to maybe do some word association. Like, I'll say a name and you say what's coming. I guess let's start with Stu Hart. I know we talked about him a little bit before, but...
Let me tell you about Jack Taylor. He had this remarkable recall of these guys he used to work with. And he had his favorites, Jack Taylor, Luther Lindsay, Art Thomas, all these great big huge guys he loved to talk about from his past. I wish I could have mined his brain even more.
Another great Canadian, Whipper Billy Watson.
Icon. That word gets thrown around way too much, but I don't think there was a bigger wrestling name ever in the history of Canada. He was our Gorgeous George. Where Gorgeous George sold a ton of TVs in the U.S., for Canada, it was Whipper Watson.
To build off the last two guys, do you think that wrestling fans should care more about history?
In general, the wrestling business has done itself no favors by ignoring or rewriting its history. I mean, baseball revels in it, football, basketball, hockey, like all these big sports have always made a big deal of it. And when they've been so selective and so ignorant of its own past, I think that means fans don't know and don't care. But, when you're on the NFL and they're talking about Archie Manning all the time being the father of, the Manning brothers, it means something. It ties it into a past that it progresses. And we get that so little in WWE. They'll talk about the, Sika being the father of Roman Reigns. But then they don't show us enough about him. Where's the sit-down interview with Sika? Where's the sit-down interview with Afa and talking about some of those things? Those kind of things they're little, but they mean a lot because they add up through time.
I totally agree. I totally agree that they don't value history enough. The next name is Dickie Murdoch.
Redneck. Be the word that springs to mind. There's so many great Dick Murdoch stories. I love listening to Dusty tell me stories about just their life together. In fact, in the book Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, Heroes and Icons, like he talks about, those were his favorite ever times in pro wrestling. Like, it was just him and Dickie Murdoch going up and down the road, pulling all kinds of hijinks, drinking beer. It was a magical time that's long gone, and I feel privileged to at least heard the stories.
I would love to maybe sit down sometime and talk about it, because I love hearing about Dickie Murdoch stories.
Yeah, well, he was not your straight and narrow kind of guy. He lived life to the fullest, and certainly was a long way from being politically correct. he definitely, I mean, he grew up in the South. He's a Texas boy and came from a wrestling family too. Not that anyone ever talks about that. I mean, you could forgive some of that racism and the redneckish, if that's a good word. But it was just a different time. He's a guy I wish I could go back in time and interview. There's a few guys like that that I'd just love to have talked to. That they would have been so colorful and so much fun to listen to.
I totally agree. Now another person who made his name up in Canada, Flying Brian Pillman.
That was my first ever magazine piece. So, what was that? Wrestling Eye, I guess, is what comes to mind. He had tons of potential. He just was so small that I think that made him push himself, and that led to the steroids. It led to some of the painkillers. Then it led to all kinds of issues, and he was a great talent. He probably overachieved if anything.
Dusty Rhodes.
Well, he's the dream. I mean, he really did live the American dream. I mean, he was a son of a plumber who became an icon, a national star, in a time when there wasn't really national stars. I mean, he could, sell out Madison Square Gardens. He could sell out down in Florida. They could bring him in and he'd work St. Louis, or Bill Watts would bring him in out in Oklahoma. He could work wherever and be on top. There's so few guys like that. I mean, you list from his era, there's like him, Andre the Giant. There's just not enough guys that could have worked anywhere and been the guy on top.
You're right about that. And it's still hard to believe he's been gone a year.
Amen.
Yeah. One more name, and that is Canada's greatest athlete.
Well, there's two of them. Gene Kiniski would certainly claim that, and he did. He was always so loud. More recent fans will remember that as Iron Mike Sharp used to. That was how he wanted to be introduced when he was on Maple Leaf Wrestling, especially. Both of them were important guys in wrestling history. Both of them, wrestling families, right? We had the Kiniski sons, both worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mike Sharp came from his dad and his uncle were among the first Gaijin stars in Japan, and they carved a legacy that still goes on today with guys like Will Ospreay or Ricochet, really succeeding in Japan. I mean, they owe so much to the Sharp brothers, who were billed as Americans, but they're actually from Hamilton, Ontario.
Now, my last question is, do you think that even if on a national scale, or an international scale more so, that wrestling fans may not know history, do you think that local fans, like a fan in Hamilton, Ontario, should know about the Sharp brothers? Or, Toronto, they should know that Edge came from Toronto?
There's an element of that, and I think a lot of it is cultural. Certainly in, say, Quebec, there's a pride that happens with anybody who's from Quebec and succeeding elsewhere. That's always been there, and it will always be there because they have a very unique culture there. Whereas, in Nashville, there's some pride in that. In Toronto, there's some pride in that. But by and large, it's just hard for people to keep track of everybody anymore. I mean, the world's become a big place, and there's so much going on. I think that describes it pretty well.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And with that, if you liked the video, leave a like, or subscribe to the channel for more content just like this that you can only find right here at Wrestling Express. Greg, thank you for joining me.
Thanks. So I should remind everybody to visit Slam Wrestling. That's where I've been working for 20 years now, doing this stuff. Alloverbooks.ca is where to get my different books. Like I said, there's the cheap plug for my son. Yes, he and I worked on a hockey book together called Duck with the Puck. It's available at allriverbooks.ca and on Amazon. And he's a wrestling fan a little bit too. It is pretty surreal that I can get a phone call from Edge, and he talks to him, and then he goes to the schoolyard and mentions to a buddy, "Hey, I just talked to Edge," and they look at him and go, "What? No, you didn't." "Yeah, I did." So he's been pretty lucky.
That's awesome.
All right, thanks for the time. There.
Thank you for the time.
So there, you can't see me anymore. We'll turn off the video. All right, thanks a lot, Michael.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.